afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Magruder. I'm the Executive Director of Resources for Independence, which is the Center for Independent Living in Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington counties. If you are new to IAM actually stands for Independence Amplified Maryland. And this is your opportunity to know what's going on in the world of disability and take control of your future. So we host these every Monday from 2 to 3. And if you're not already on the invitation list or you don't get information about it, let us know and we can add you to that. So today we're very, very excited. Today is obviously the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And just to give a little introduction about the ADA, and then I'm going to turn it over to our spectacular speakers. Are we still good, Heather? Okay. So the anniversary of the ADA is one of the greatest disability movements of all times. The ADA was actually signed in 1990. It's a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. It affords similar protections against discrimination to Americans with disabilities as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which made discrimination based on race, religion, sex, national origin, and other characteristics illegal in later sexual orientation. In addition, unlike the Civil Rights Act, the ADA also requires covered employers to provide reasonable accommodations to employees with disabilities and imposes accessibility requirements on public accommodations. So I'm very honored to introduce our two spectacular speakers, Marian Vessels, who before retirement a few years ago was the director of the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. And also we have with us Kathy Raggio, who is the founder of Independence Now, the Center for Independent Living in Prince George's and Montgomery counties, and she also served as the secretary of the Maryland Department of Disabilities under Governor O'Malley, correct? Okay, so ladies, I'm going to turn it over to you all. If we could, just before we get started, we're going to break probably twice in the session today. So if you have questions, if you could put them in the chat box, and we'll get to those then whenever we break for questions. Thank you.
Hey, hi, my name is Marian Vessels, and I will be getting started. I'm going to share my screen. Can you see the screen? Great. Okay. So we're celebrating today 31 years of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this poster that I've got on the screen is from the Great Lakes ADA Center. And it says 31 years, Americans with Disabilities is enough notice. And that's going to be kind of the theme of today's presentation, that we've got 31 years of history of the ADA, but we still have a lot of work to do. So just to remind you, Kathy and I are your presenters. And as I said, today is the 31st anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was, as Lori indicated, it was a significant event in the history of disabilities, not only for the US, but actually for the world. It was an incredible day. I was honored to be a part of the folks sitting on that White House lawn. And if you can imagine, it was even hotter and more humid there than it is here right now. It was not the nicest day, but it was the most incredible day. And I really consider it kind of to be maybe the 4th of July for people with disabilities, in that it was really opening up the civil rights of people with disabilities. And this was the first time we had broad spectrum rights around a variety of areas that all cover. If you remember nothing else about today's presentation, Kathy and I both want you to really remember that disability rights our civil rights. And that's really going to be some of the theme. We want you to be empowered, to take action, to know your rights, and do what you can to have them be effective, not only for you, but for all citizens with disabilities, all residents. I'm going to do just a really brief overview because after 31 years, sometimes folks kind of forget what the ADA covered. It covers employment of people with disabilities. Any employer that has 15 or more employees, state and local government, are required to provide reasonable accommodation to the known disability of an individual. The ADA has a very broad definition of people with disabilities, but it is incumbent on the person with a disability to identify that they have a disability and to request the accommodation. State and local governments are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. In previous laws under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, sometimes state and local governments were covered because they received federal funds. But this was the first time that state and local government were required to provide the employment application for people with disabilities, to provide reasonable accommodation, and also to provide all of their services in an accessible manner, both physical settings and in service delivery. So this was the first time across the board, as people with disabilities, we can expect and or request the need for an accommodation to be able to participate in a program or a service or a setting provided by state or local government. Under Title III of the ADA, private businesses are required now to accommodate people with disabilities. So not only if they are larger than 15 under the ADA of employees, but they're also required to provide those accommodations to allow people with disabilities to participate in the purchase and or enjoyment of goods or services. So that goes across the board in things like doctor's office, hospitals, grocery stores, department stores, and now actually purchasing online. Telecommunications, long ago, there were no relay services that were available long before we knew that we could text on our phones, because we didn't have phones like this when the ADA was passed. People who were deaf or hard of hearing or had communication challenges were unable to use telephones, and the ADA mandated that there would be the relay, as we know today, to allow people with disabilities to participate in telephone services. Miscellaneous, my favorite, just this kind of a scattering of little pieces and bits and pieces of that didn't fit anywhere else. But I wish they had taken Title V and talked about transportation, because transportation is covered under the ADA under state and local government if they provide the service, or under as a private business. And most of us know transportation is one of the larger challenges for people with disabilities in getting to and from places. Accessible vehicles can be very expensive. Many people can't drive, so that they need to rely on public access to transportation. So that's a really, really quick and dirty overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is a great resource that I'm very proud of, that I was able to work for 20 years, the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. It's one of 10 regional centers providing information or resources and guidances on the ADA. So if you ever have a question about the ADA, you can call the 1-800 number, 1-800-949-4232, or go to www.adainfo.org, and there's tons of resources there. And they would be happy to answer any specific question you have and help walk you through how the law applies to you. Now, you may have noticed when we were talking about the ADA that there was a couple things we didn't talk about. Housing is one. That's covered under the Fair Housing Act. Air transportation is covered under the Air Transit Act. So there's a couple of laws that happened before the ADA, and the ADA did not include them because of those pre-existing laws. It's really important to know, and as we talk today, that we want to make sure that you understand your rights, but also your responsibilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Any civil rights law is a piece of paper until the people who need it help to enforce it, which means you need to know the rights and responsibilities you have under the law, and then you need to educate yourself and others about how they apply. So it means if you're thinking about working, what is an accommodation? What does it mean under the ADA? And then possibly doing some research about what is best for you. What kind of needs do you have as a person with a disability? And reaching out to access services for state and local government, knowing the programs that exist and what your needs are going to be. A great example for me was I use a power chair when I'm out and about in the community. I went to a local Howard County recreation center that had a hand bike that I wanted to try. But because I drive from my chair, I was unable to access the hand bike. They purchased ramps that allowed my wheelchair to get up onto the base so that I could be able to pull my wheelchair up and to use the hand bike. But I had to talk with them about my needs, and that my needs were different than most wheelchairs because I had such a low threshold, and what kind of accommodations I would need. And then they were able to purchase them for me, and I was able to use them. And so I was able to participate in a mini triathlon a couple of weeks ago because of that. So knowing yourself, knowing your needs, knowing your rights, and then advocating for your rights. And then if you have a question, there are resources out there to be able to help support you as you move forward in ensuring that your disability rights can be made civil rights by enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In the 31 years since the signing of the ADA, we have come a long way. There's lots of expectation in the community that things will be accessible. You see more people with disabilities out on the street. You see more folks with disabilities represented in media. There's a lot of information out there. You'll see a lot of things about the ADA. People are considering people with disabilities as they make decisions, both employment decisions, corporate decisions, government decisions. But that's just the baseline. We have so much further to go. And remember, the Americans with Disabilities Act is just the baseline. Any state or local government can enact laws to go above what the ADA says. You can't go below it. You can never go lower than what the Americans with Disabilities Act mandates. But you can make things more accessible by having some states lower the employment level to maybe 2 employees with disabilities. Here in the state of Maryland, it's 15. But in Maryland, new churches are required to be built accessible so that people with mobility disabilities can get to the sanctuary, can get to the baptismal font. And the ADA does not provide that provision because of the separation of church and state. So there are always ways that we can improve the access and the inclusion of people with disabilities by going and above what the Americans with Disabilities Act requires. I think at this point, I am going to see if there's any questions that we might have in the chat, Lori.
Okay, let's see here.
This is Siobhan. I have a question. I couldn't complete it in the chat. Is that okay?
Sure, Siobhan.
I just wanted to ask if the ADA, are they working on, you know, how the malls have all these kiosks, or if you go to the airport and you want to register to, sign up for the being first in line and that sort of thing. Are they working on having those accessible specifically for those who are blind and visually impaired and maybe other disabilities like dyslexia or whatever?
Yes, and I'm certainly not an expert in that area.
Deaf people too. Deaf people, Ms. Vessels.
Yes, like I said, I'm not an expert in that area, but that is they are developing standards for kiosks to be accessible. Many kiosks now have ports so that you can put your your earphones in to be able to hear. You can change screens. There's a variety of things, but I'm certainly not an expert. But I know that's there are some basic standards, and they continue to improve the access to kiosks, because in many places, kiosks is the only way that you can get service and information, and to not have them accessible eliminates a lot of people with disabilities from participation.
Thank you.
Sorry, Marion, it's Katie. Thank you again. Every time you present on the ADA, and I've heard several of your presentations, I learned something new, but something came to mind. There was a man who wrote after listening to Mike's radio segment this morning about his wife who has Parkinson's, and when she goes out in public, it's often difficult for her to open doors by herself, and there ought to be a way in which people are required to have those, push button automatic door openers installed. And I know that that's not necessarily covered under the ADA, but I wonder if someone wanted to kind of advocate for that, would it be like building code people? Would you go to the county, or would it be a state issue? I'm sure there'd be a lot of opposition from particularly small businesses. But can you speak to any of that?
Well, it's kind of an interesting issue around the ADA. The ADA mandates that people have access to your business, but it doesn't, as you indicated, Katie, that it requires that push button or the seeing eye that automatically sees you and opens the door. Many businesses will put in the push button because it's so much cheaper and it doesn't break down as much as those seeing eyes. But if somebody wanted to advocate and change the regulation to require that every business, let's say, has that push button, it could be done at the county level and or the state level. I'm not aware of any jurisdiction that has mandated that, because as you indicated, you're talking about an awful lot of small businesses that would have to then put in. One of the things, though, that they can do that is very what the ADA requires, which is cheap and easy, is that you can install a doorbell that is a remote doorbell, so that it has a button at the outside that can be pushed, and it rings to wherever someone is able to be available to open that door for somebody who has a need. And that can then be made very accessible. There are buttons you can buy that are really big that make it very easy. And positioned in such a way that most people would be able to easily reach it and be able to notify someone. And a lot of businesses have done that. And in working with businesses, that is one of the strategies that I've encouraged. If they're resistant to putting in an automatic door opener, that's at least one way that people can be notified. The other way, a lot of people will just use their cell phone and call the business and say, I'm outside, your door's too heavy, or I cannot open it, would you please come? So there can be different strategies to be able to gain access to a building or to a business, but it could be advocated both at a county level, a city level, or at a state level. But I'm sure with incredible resistance for that mandate because of the expense that many businesses would say it would entail.
Thank you.
So it doesn't look like we have any questions. We did put the ADA phone number in there, the website, and there's been just a few other comments. Anybody have any other questions at this time before we move forward?
Well, I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy and let her get started since time is flying by.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Raggio. It's great to be with you today. Is anybody having trouble hearing me? Good. Okay, so back in 2015 was the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I was new to social media. I had just gotten on Facebook and I really didn't know what to post, so I decided to create a one-woman celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think that each of us can do this. Of course, if you're a man, you're not going to do a one-woman celebration, but a one-person celebration of the ADA. And I think that it behooves us to think about all the good that the ADA has accomplished. And this is a great day to do it on, the annual anniversary of the signing of the ADA. So I tend to use a lot of visuals. So I will try to remember to describe them for everybody who's not able to see them. This is a toilet stall with a toilet and two grab bars in it. And we begin with a little potty talk. One of the greatest gifts of the Americans with Disabilities Act has been the big toilet stalls. They must be 5 feet wide to be exact, with ample space for wheelchair users to turn and close the door. Full community participation would not be possible without them. You'd have to limit your time out in public. Here's Barbie sitting on the toilet. Along with accessible toilet stalls is the requirement for higher toilets that enable those who must transfer from a wheelchair or who may use other assistive devices, have stiff knees, etc., to use the toilets in a better way. Non-skid floors. This is a graphic of a child using crutches. And restaurants and grocery stores, when we have non-skid floors, it means less slip sliding away for walkers with mobility issues. This is a picture of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late great Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I, for one, think this is the greatest contribution of the Americans with Disabilities Act to date. And that is the decision that she wrote in the case of Olmstead versus LC and EW. That was a court case brought in Georgia against Olmstead, who was the commissioner of health there at the time. These two women, Lois Curtis and Elaine, whose last name I'm not remembering, sued to get out of an institution because, you know, the assessments indicated they could live in the community, but the state of Georgia was not putting up the funding for them to go to the community. So the state of Georgia appealed it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found that there was indeed what we all believed, the integration mandate within the ADA. And thousands of people have been able to leave institutions as a result of this decision. One of my personal favorite requirements is the requirement for pool lifts. Here's Barbie sitting on a pool lift at a public pool. It's at a hotel. And I use, whenever I travel, I use the pool lifts at the hotels, whether I want to swim or not. I make a point of making sure that they are in working order. And I always do use them because I love to swim. But, you know, I visited Poughkeepsie a few years ago. We went up to Hyde Park, New York to see the FDR museum. And the pool lift was not working. Nobody had ever used it, the manager told us. So we insisted that they get a non-corroded battery that worked to put in it. Wasn't that hard, right? He drove to Connecticut to get it for us. So as a thank you, and you always have to say thank you, I believe, when people go the extra mile, you know, we commended him. Kudos to him, to his management. And that, you know, he really went out of his way to make sure that that pool lift was working by the final day that we stayed at this hotel. There's a picture of an accessible ATM machine. These have been, when they've been installed at the required height, and having Braille means that we can gain access to our money without having to rely on somebody to access it for us, giving them our pins or whatever. And there I am on a public bus in, where was I? I think I was in Italy at the time. But accessible buses, paratransit system, and drivers trained to use the equipment make community participation better and possible for those who are unable to drive and or who want to get around while they're traveling. And the final one I'll show you today is Barbie again, sitting on a counter. She's got her arms up in the air for a reason. One of my pet peeves is that although the toilet stalls may be accessible in public restrooms, oftentimes the soap dispensers are not, and the paper towel dispensers are not. So I must raise my arms, and down my arms goes all the water into my armpit. It's just a bit of a hassle, but if you're all dressed up for some sort of an event, it's an issue. So I'm going to stop there, and I would invite any of you to name one of your favorite things that you celebrate about the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then we'll take a break. Don't everybody speak at once.
I feel this is a great thing. Hello, Miss Rigby. Can you hear me?
Say that again, please.
She okay, Hassan? Hi.
Oh, hi.
Yes, I saw Biden signing the thing and honoring the whole thing for the 31st anniversary today on CNN today. I think this is a great thing.
It is.
And you think it will work for people with deaf people too? Hello? Or
Yeah,
ADHD?
Yeah, for deaf people, what would you be celebrating about the ADA?
Well, I'm not deaf, but good to have some, you know, in general with the disability, people with ADHD or Asperger's or auto, you know, immune deficiency or stuff like that, you know, to people with disabilities in general. You know,
people who are deaf might be celebrating the provision of interpreters in medical settings, particularly private doctors' offices. I mean, having to take somebody from your family with you all the time to help you understand and interpret for you is just not a good thing for your privacy.
Yeah. Will this go for mental illness too?
Yes.
Yeah, because I know some people with that too. Also, I have a cousin also.
I'm thankful for accessible parking.
Oh, really? Yeah. Hey, you saw what happened with the Olympics, don't you? Did you see what happened that one of the deaf people couldn't go over there because of the COVID and stuff?
Oh, yes. One of the Olympians was not allowed to bring their interpreter. And so they had to skip the Olympics.
It's the Paralympics, and she's both deaf and blind, and they would not allow her to bring her mother as her interpreter, which, you know, is, I think, unconscionable, but that's just my opinion.
And she actually got honored this morning at the governor's office meeting.
She was there, Bong?
Yes, she was there this morning and she got honored by the governor and he awarded her a citation.
Oh, that's great.
That's a great thing. Yes, indeed. I feel the
So,
mayor should be doing
I-
the same thing, Brandon Scott, too, in
Yes.
Baltimore City.
So Misty had said accessible parking is her favorite part. I don't know if people caught that. And I think for me, I think I'd agree with you, Kathy. I think the Olmsted decision is really important. I know I was, you know, my disability is largely invisible. And so I haven't had to, I think, do a lot of reasonable accommodations or things like that. But my Aunt Sandy was born in the 1940s with cerebral palsy and ended up being institutionalized pretty much her entire life and then dying in a nursing facility. And I think, you know, had things moved a little quicker with Money Follows the Person and, you know, getting that up and running nationally, that she might have ended up being able to go in peace where she felt at home. So I think for me, that's probably my favorite part.
Hi, this is Joan Rumenap, and I think one of my favorite parts was when my parents and I were traveling and my mom was using a wheelchair at that time, and she was able to experience everything that my dad and I were experiencing, such as the Sistine Chapel and also Santorini, Greece, where you can only get up by a bunch of steps or by a, oh shoot, I'm not gonna think of the name of it. Something that takes you from the bottom to the top, whatever, and it was totally accessible. So that was the best part of all of this for me, so that my mom could enjoy everything with my dad and myself.
Great. Thanks for sharing.
Hi, this is Siobhan. Among many, one of my favorites is that they have the banking systems where they have the Braille and then they have the audio. So it's directing you for each of the steps you take to control your own money, so to speak, instead of having to wait for someone on their time to go to the bank with them and have them assist you, or stand in a long line at the teller and have them assist you. So I think that just really increases one's independence with that available.
Yes. That was one of my slides, if you recall. Yep.
This is Abiola at Independence Now, and I am particularly grateful for reasonable accommodations in the workplace. And in the early part of my times working with Independence Now, that was particularly important for me because of the extensive amount of medications that I was on that made it very difficult for me to stay awake. And, you know, and thankfully, the team that I work with, my supervisors, were willing to, you know, work with me and as I started to improve. And I'm deeply appreciative of that. I didn't know before working with Independence Now that you could request extra breaks, for example, on the job. I never knew that before. So I think that's great.
That's a great example. Okay, we're going to take a break now, right, Marion?
Sure. Do we have any more questions for people?
No questions. Again, lots of links in the comments. The summary of Olmsted, also article about Becca Myers, and lots of good references in the comments. Any other questions at this point?
Not a question, but this is Bong. So I just wanted to also say that I think for myself, I think I'm grateful for the accommodations and also the public transportation piece. I think you know, access to public transportation for people with disabilities, especially those who use mobility aids, such as wheelchairs, walkers, canes, and so forth. Even though it's not perfect, I think it's come a long way, and it really enables a person with a disability who may not be able to drive to get across the country, to get across town, you know, on their own. and be independent on their own, especially if they're able to, do self-care on their own. They don't necessarily need anyone else, but they have that physical boundary of either a wheelchair or some other mobility aid. But I think because of the ADA, it's made it a lot easier for people with disabilities, especially physical disabilities, to travel across the country and world, actually. So.
And we've seen examples of traveling across the world. Both Kathy and I have traveled, probably not as extensively as we'd like, but I use public transportation when I'm abroad even more than I do here in the States. And it is a wonderful way to be able to get around and see and meet people. And especially when it can be challenging to get in and out of taxis and other vehicles. So it's been wonderful. I think one of the things that is reassuring for me to see is that because of the ADA, many other countries around the world have developed their own disability rights laws and have provided access to their citizens as well as then visitors. And more as I travel, I'm finding things are more and more accessible, and there's consideration of people with disabilities. So even though the ADA may not have been the very first regulation, because it was so broadly heralded when it passed, that many countries have taken up the gauntlet and provided that access.
Yeah, I'd like to echo both Marion and Bong with the accessibility of using transportation and just that growth that continues on. I mean, still even today with I can speak for the local transit system around here, how that's still a work in progress, and just the hope that's in that, and just the recognition that, yeah, there is something more that can be done, and that stuff is being done. So I'm grateful for that.
And Chuck, maybe that's a great example of where advocacy really has been very effective. And I'm sure Bon can weigh in on this as well as Kathy, that there is still a huge way to go in the full accessibility and functioning of paratransit and other systems. But advocacy has had a tremendous role in bettering the service and holding public agencies accountable for the service that they are providing. And without that, I don't think the service would be near as good as it is today. And that's where we need one place of many that we need to stay very vigilant and know what the regulations say, so that you're not advocating on behalf of your maybe personal needs, but what the law says, and making sure that they are providing the kind of service that the law says. And I've seen tremendous changes from, very little or no transportation in many places across the country to now fully accessible systems, but that still have flaws in service delivery that are needing to be held accountable for.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think it's just
a continuous feedback loop to the
Michael, is that you? I
powers
saw
that
you
be.
on TV here. I saw you on TV, Michael. It's me, Chioke.
Saw me on TV?
Yes, I
No,
saw
I don't
you.
think so.
Yes.
I don't think that was me on TV, but I would been on the radio recently. I guess I just really want to highlight, shortly after the ADA passed over the next few years, I know a lot of my friends were saying, well, these younger people are just going to take everything for granted, and they're not going to have, they're not going to have any of these big advocacy challenges. Well, surprise, surprise. What we've learned about any civil rights law is that it needs to be constantly defended and needs to be constant. There needs to be constant advocacy around the rights that we have. Otherwise, we could lose them. So I just am grateful for the people who advocated before me that made the ADA possible, and Public Law 94-142 for education, and HUD, the Housing and Urban Development laws. And I'm grateful for those who come afterward, and to those younger than me. I can't imagine anybody's younger than me, but for those who are younger than I am, keep up the fight. It is a constant battle. It's not, it is a feature of democracies that you have to constantly fight for your rights. It's not like you do it and then you say, okay, I guess we're done with that now. I looked once, and I used to live in Oregon, and I looked here about 2 years ago to see, I was instrumental in passing several laws in Oregon in the 80s and 90s. And it was fascinating for me to go back and look and realize that every single one of them had been changed in a major way since I helped pass those laws. That's the way it should be. Democracies are constantly growing, ever changing. They're always flexible. They're never stagnant if they're real democracies.
Take a little break now? Or shall we just forge on?
John, I think we forge on.
Before we go, Steve Lieberman made a comment about United Spinal Association is supporting the Disability Access to Transportation Act as well, which would in part improve paratransit service through a one-stop paratransit pilot program. And it's part of the transportation legislation being considered in Congress. So there's an example of advocacy.
One of the things that I want to do next is talk about what holds us back, what gets in the way of us realizing the full potential of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Some people call it ableism, which is defined as discrimination and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. I would maintain that there are some myths and stereotypes about people with disabilities that we need to be aware of, all of us, and that these are often the things that get in the way. They are embedded in a lot of people's minds. People don't see the Americans with Disabilities Act as a civil rights act. They still are hung up on a charity model. So, you know, I have a little slide here. It's just a one PowerPoint slide. And we can then, I'll open it up after I run through these. But let's talk about some of the myths or stereotypes that you may have observed that get in the way. So what I've got are the person with disability is an invalid who needs to be taken care of. The person with a disability is asexual, and this gets in the way oftentimes of parents being forced to give up their children, or the courts, you know, a partner going to court to try and get the court to agree with them to take away their children because they're not fit to raise them. A person with a disability is dangerous. This often has been held true for people with mental illness. You know, we don't want a group home in our backyard because those people are dangerous. Incompetent. This is often a stereotype applied to people with intellectual disabilities, that if they're incompetent, surely we wouldn't want to hire them. People are objects of charity. And let me just say this, that if I am the recipient of your charity, will I ever be your equal? Will you ever consider me as an equal if you're giving all the time to me? Perpetual child. This goes back to incompetent. We see a lot of people with intellectual disabilities as always children. So, you know, we give them childish gifts, for instance. Special, we have special education, Special Olympics, and so forth. And in many cases, that has led to great accomplishments by people with disabilities. But the term special is, again, a bit of a problem when it comes to being perceived as an equal. And then fate worse than death. And we know that every year in many, many states, assisted suicide legislation rears its ugly head. because, gee, people perceive that having a significant disability is a fate worse than death. So let's help them die. Anyway, so those are the ones that I have seen, and I'm going to leave that up there and have you all join in and throw your 2 cents in throw your 2 cents in about these issues and these stereotypes.
This is Abiola again. One that immediately came to mind was fetishism, or being fetishized. Is that the right word? Persons with disabilities being the target of someone's fetish.
Ah, okay. How does that get in the way, Abiola, of them being, for instance, being employed?
Well, being employed, I don't know. It depends on the job, doesn't it? I'm not sure. But in general, I thought that this was more about the kinds of things that persons with disabilities may experience, but whether or not they experience it on the job, I don't know.
This is Cheryl. I can answer that actually. As being 4'3" and about 48 pounds at 45 years old, I can tell you it's actually been a help in getting jobs. When I go on a public bus, I seem to attract a certain set of individuals. They really do like to give me their names and phone numbers, which I can then turn into police. So I would be perfect undercover, just saying.
So you've turned it to your advantage.
Yeah, and I think going, with this, I don't know, there is a TED Talk, and I forgot the woman's name, but it's called Inspiration Porn, I think is the name of it. And it's like people with disabilities being viewed as doing something courageous or heroic when really they're just living their lives. They're going to school, they're going to work, they're having a family. And I think that's really dangerous because again, it makes it so, people with disabilities aren't normal. They're again, special because they're doing these wonderful things that everyone else is doing.
It's the
I left that one off
villain.
deliberately. I was hoping somebody would say it because it's a big problem.
Yeah, Katie, this is Pauletta Shepherd. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, along those lines, not only the person with the disability is seen as being heroic, but parents like myself, oh, I'm considered real heroic because I take care of a very medically complex child on my own in my home and adamantly refuse to put her and will not put her in a nursing home. So I am just a saint. Who wouldn't take care of their child that they love, whether they're disabled or what? I'm a parent, not necessarily a saint. I'm a parent. So that works both ways, the person with the disabilities and those of us who are caregivers to people with disabilities.
What do you say when people say that to you?
Sometimes I'm just kind of speechless, and Kathy, I sometimes say, she's my child. What else would I do? And they go, oh yeah, I suppose so. My daughter was in the, she had a minor procedure done this past Monday. Oh, and the nurse there could not say enough. Oh, you're a wonderful parent. Oh, I just admire you. Why? I'm a parent. Yeah, I get it a lot. Maybe because she's very complex and they just scratch their heads why she's still home. I don't know.
Paraletta, this is William.
Hi, William.
It's because they don't understand your situation, and that's why they ask.
Yeah. Yeah, they can't imagine how we could do it. That's why it was such a battle for me to get her back home when she was in the hospital the last time. Even more complicated than she went in. And the thought was, oh, I know you can't take care of her at home now. And I battled those folks almost 2 months to get my child home because they couldn't conceive of it. A person that disabled can't be cared for at home. That's a long story, but that's for another presentation.
You know, when the Pennhurst Institution in Pennsylvania was closing, there was a study done by Jim Conroy out at Temple University where he studied the leavers and the stayers. And what they found was there were twins for everybody. Everybody who was left in the institution, there was a twin with the same exact disability thriving in the community, whereas the twin in the institution was not thriving.
Mm-hmm.
As part of this discussion, that you often find that it's either heroes or villains, people with disabilities. Either they're the horrible people because they have a disability, and you look at history, you look at media, you look at movies, or you're a hero. You're totally amazing to do whatever you do. And media goes both ways.
Where, you know, when you think about it, where do you find disabled folks in popular culture and the media? It's usually at the end of an hour of news or half hour of news. It's the last segment. I call it the palate cleanser, where it's the inspiring story after we've
Inspiration porn.
had to watch, you know, so many horrible things that are going on, in our community or around the world. And it's usually, look at this wonderful person who was nice to a disabled person, or look at this disabled person who's doing, normal things. It's like, it's the two sides of the coin. It's, it's either the pity trope or the inspiration trope. We're not allowed to be, going about our lives in a typical way. It's everything has to be framed in these extraordinary ways. And then at the other side of, it's interesting, Marion, you bring up the villain aspect. When you look at, Hollywood media, so often the villain has some kind of disability, whether it's a facial disfigurement or limb loss or what have you. It's a very age-old trope to paint the villain as having some kind of a disability, which again, it's, as you say, heroes or villains.
So I actually want to speak to that a little. This is Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl. She okay?
I was watching Peter Pan with my nephew a couple years ago, and people always use Captain Hook as one of those examples, but I don't know why we as a disability community always look down on that particular character, because here's a guy with a very obvious disability, and he's in a position of power, and he's in a position of leadership, and nobody, that else is working on that pirate ship is looking at him and saying he can't do his job because he's missing a hand. They still let him be in charge. So I feel like he should be an icon that we should be looking towards, not putting down for being a villain. But that's just my personal opinion.
Except that he's trying to kill Peter Pan.
I love your opinion. That's great.
That's because they look at him funny. It's like Neverland. They look at funny, like Michael Jackson. Don't you think?
Like who?
Michael Jackson.
Your opinion, Cheryl.
Yeah, because he might have had some type of disability. Don't you think?
I'm going to go back to the comment that Steve made, because here's something that as a group, the Centers for Independent Living in the state might want to organize. And that is a meeting with the local TV stations to talk to them about that, as you called it, Steve, palate cleansing segment at the end of the news, and see if you can get them to understand what inspiration porn is and the impact, that negative impact that it can have on the lives of people with disabilities, and see if you can get them to figure out how to pitch it in a different way. I'm not sure it can be pitched in a different way. Maybe they just need to stop doing it, but that's something positive that could be done. And I think there are groups at the national level and individuals at the national level that are trying to do this as it pertains to Hollywood and things that are created on a bigger scale than WBAL, WJZ, and WMAR, et cetera, and the local Sinclair station. You know, that's something that you all might want to organize, and of course, you know, meet ahead of time to understand how you're going to pitch this to them, and see where you go and what you can get accomplished. And then you can brag about it on your 704 reports or whatever.
I think that would be a great thing to have this, don't you think? Because did you know Michael Jackson cared about people with disabilities?
Didn't know that.
Hello?
I didn't know that.
What happened to your sound? Hello?
Hello?
Still there?
Michael Jackson did what?
He cared for people with disabilities, but they want to have molested a lot of people. And when they mentioned Neverland, you know what I mean? Did you know that? Hello? Can you hear me, Lori?
Thanks, Kiyoki. I think Kathy was out of the range of her microphone.
Oh, really? But can you hear me now, Heather?
I can hear you, but I think that Kathy was away from her microphone a little bit.
I was not. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Michael Jackson cared a lot about people at Neverland Ranch with the disabilities. Did you know that?
Didn't know that, but thank you.
About, you know, Neverland, you know, they want to still look at him as a molester, see? You understand me?
I do understand you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, Kiyoki.
So we're at 2:59, and we do like to try to keep everything on time with our broadcast.
Oh yeah, we've got the poll too, Lori.
Yes. So I would like to thank Marion and Kathy for a very good session. Yay.
Yay, that was great.
Yes. So Heather, did you want to talk a little bit about just the poll that's going to be coming up?
Sure. It's the same poll we had out last week that Sarah from Independence Now, who was not able to join us today, had trying to get some feedback on kind of what are and Katie and Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, feedback on what issue is kind of the most critical right now. Is I think you're working on the state independent living plan. Is that what it's for, Katie?
Well, in general, we used to do a needs assessment and we didn't get great responses, but the SILs kind of thought, you know, are the best kind of measure of what the needs are, what are our consumers asking about. And so we had kind of like, we have like overarching ideas and we just want to put it out there. So you all, if we're wrong, can tell us what the needs are. So we've kind of picked some of the overarching ideas and put them into a poll.
Except that I forgot to set the poll up.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
so
okay.
The poll will be next week. I'm so sorry. I forgot to set the poll up.
I'm going to put my email in the chat. I'm going to put my email. I'm going to put my email in the chat box. If you have any needs that you think are unmet, and I believe that there's probably a lot of them, just email me and I will take your feedback back to the Independent Living Partners.
And I'll have the poll for next week too.
Thank you.
Can I bring some guests on?
It's Bong. If you need any help with that, just hit me up a couple days before that.
All right, thanks, Bong.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, is there any other announcements, like from Amanda or someone?
I don't know. Is Mike, are you still on the call?
He's on the phone.
Oh, he's on the phone. Okay, I can't see. I don't.
Well, I think he's unmuting now.
Oh,
maybe I'm wrong. There he is.
I didn't know if Mike wanted to talk about how we're hiring at.
You guys there?
Yes, we're here. Mike, are we hiring at Image
We
Center?
are hiring at the Image Center, yes. Sorry about that. We are hiring at the Image Center. We're looking for independent living specialists, and please come one, come all.
ARI is also hiring, and thank you for prompting me to do that because I didn't have it on my mind. We're looking for it's a very part-time position, just 10 hours a week, perfect for maybe those of you who are hoping to dip your toes into employment, returning to work within Meade Village in Anne Arundel County to engage residents of that community with disabilities in our core services. So next week I'll put the thing in the I'll be prepared next week.
You will see some announcements coming out from the Image Center this week. And by the way, we're just a lot more fun to work for than Katie would be. I mean, come on. Let's be
Whatever.
practical.
Whatever, Michael.
No, there's few partnerships that have ever worked out better in my world than Katie and the work she does and the Image Center. We love each other. So thank you all and thanks for asking. My apology. I was caught in a phone call here on a program we're trying to get started. So I'll get back to it. But yes, please, if you're interested in working for a Center for Independent Living, we are looking for a full-time independent living specialist. You have to have excellent reading, writing, and typing skills, and need to be able to manage word processing and online case management. So please come and work with us. We would love to have you.
This is Cheryl. I would add there's another position, full-time position out there
thanks, Cheryl.
for an executive assistant. Main skills we're looking for is somebody who can cognitively cue and give direction for executive functioning skills. So contact us. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you for all joining us. And next week, what's the topic next week, Heather? I know we talked about it.
I think, are we having open chat next week, Mike?
Yeah, I would say that Mike probably wants to do the Mike Radio Hour with open chat.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So
I think we're doing open chat next week.
Okay, that sounds great. Sounds great. All right. All right. Well, again, thank you, Marion. Thank you, Kathy. And I think you gave all of us some challenges that hopefully we can talk now with our independent living partners and themselves and try to make up a game plan to